1, 2, 3, 4. Good evening, Space Monkeys. This is BlueHighwind, and welcome back to Freelancing, the series that I try to do weekly with some sort of schedule, but unfortunately schedules hate me. We've had a very long argument and battle, and I lost. So, now it's coming out on Thursday. I wanted it Wednesday, couldn't happen, there wasn't any time. So here we are, it's today. Now, do I have an excuse? No, I don't. I was starting a new job last week, but this week I'm actually not doing too many work, but yeah, I just couldn't do it today. I just could not get the free time to go and sit alone in a room and record shit for a while. So, now here it is. If you're wondering what freelancing is, it is a weekly kind of podcast thing that I put up on YouTube where I discuss something vaguely nerdy. If you're wondering who you are Space Monkeys. You're the audience. That's what I call you. I think it's cute. I am BlueHighwind. If you're wondering who I am, then I don't know why you're listening. Maybe you'll figure some things out about me during your little journey through this, but in other cases, just go to my blog and you'll probably learn more. Anyway, this week's episode is about documentaries. There are two documentaries that I recently watched, actually the same night. And they both came out in 2013, but I was only able to find them this year. One of them came out in theaters a few months ago, and the other one just came out on Netflix. So, I just watched them, and those two documentaries are Jodorowsky's Dune and Dear Mr. Watterson, which are about fictional things, because that's what we talk about. We talk about nerdy stuff. And I don't think you can get much nerdier than Dune, so we're going to talk about that one first. Dune, as you may know, is one of the greatest sci-fi novels of all time. It was originally written by Frank Herbert sometime in the 1965. Here we are. So, Frank Herbert's Dune, great book. A kind of... I'm trying to figure out how I could describe it so you can understand. There's a sort of lack of spirituality in a lot of hard sci-fi books. Like, you go and you read, like, Ringworld or something like that. It's kind of just stellar, like, sterile. Anything by, Robert A. Heinlein. Anything by Robert A. Heinlein doesn't really seem to have too much humanity or spirit to it. The man was incredibly strange, and he had a lot of philosophies, but, you know, he kind of, sci-fi, especially hard sci-fi, especially turn of the 20th century sci-fi, is kind of just very technical. It's like, what could we possibly imagine, and I'm going to go describe this world in sort of vague detail. But Dune was different. Frank Herbert, especially the first book, the later books kind of fell apart on this point, but it kind of has this weird quality that you could really believe this world, because there's something religious about it. Obviously, the main character's journey, Paul Atreides, he kind of becomes the Messiah during the course of the journey, but it's so... There's kind of like this wackiness in visuality, and there's so much imagination in that book, like the kind of giant guild spaceships in this completely desert planet, which may sound trite today, considering Tatooine, but Arrakis in 1965 was pretty out there. And sandworms, like, just such weirdness, such variety, so many characters, It's fascinating, the 1965 book. However, I do think there are some weaknesses to it. And ultimately, it has been adapted a few times to film. Most famously in 1985 by David Lynch. No, that's actually 1984, whatever. It's the 80s. And then once in the early 2000s by the Sci-Fi Channel, but who gives two fucks? It's the Sci-Fi Channel. It wasn't very good. The 1984 film Dune is an infamous flop, generally a disaster, it's considered by everybody, and it was the last time that David Lynch would work with mainstream Hollywood ever again. And that's a shame, because I actually love the 1984 film. I think it's better than the book, and you may think I'm a little insane if you've seen that movie or you've heard about it, because it's generally regarded as one of the worst films of all time, but I just kind of like to look at things that way. When somebody goes and tells me, oh, this is the worst fucking movie I've ever seen, you know, like, I'll go back and I'm gonna go watch it, and I'm gonna see, maybe I can find something you could get out of it. Like, I like the 1998 Godzilla, I like Batman and Robin. I don't like Southland Tales. That's actually a piece of shit, but we're getting off topic. What Jodorowsky's Dune is this was an attempted adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune, made in the mid-70s, or not made in the mid-70s. This was a project made by the Chilean director Alejandro Jodorowsky, who you probably have never heard of, because even I had never heard of him before this. He's a kind of crazy art house director. He's made a few movies. One is called El Topo, which I've never seen. It's like, if you think a spaghetti western is a little dark and a little out there, El Topo is that times a billion. It's like, I'm gonna go take a spaghetti western and I'm gonna make it completely fucking insane. And then there's another movie he made was The Magic Mountain, which, actually, let me double check. Is it called The Magic Mountain, or is that another movie? No, The Holy Mountain. I don't know what The Magic Mountain is, sorry. But, yeah, The Holy Mountain is even more insane. I haven't seen either of these. I just saw clips of The Holy Mountain, and that was enough to go and think, holy shit, this is pretty nuts. In fact, I recently reviewed the movie Beyond the Black Rainbow, which I think it was like 2012 or something like that. I hated the hell out of that movie, but it was inspired a lot by Alejandro Jodorowsky's work. Now, Jodorowsky, at this point, he had made 2 great films. He was pretty much beloved by the art house circuit. These were midnight movies. These were cult films, so he had kind of an aura around him. So eventually, he's working with a French producer, Michel Sardou. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. French names, I don't get it. For some reason, the French language decides, we're going to put another letter at the end, but that last letter we're never going to pronounce, for any reason. I don't know why you do that, French people. You know what? Like, letters, it's energy you're exposing by going and writing that down. Characters were expensive on computers just a few decades ago. Why put these extra characters? What do they do? Alright, off topic, again. I don't like you French people. I love everything about you, I just don't like how you write your names. Just cut out the last letter if you're not going to pronounce it. I don't get the point. I don't get the point in English, either. But anyway, Michel Sardou, he basically went to Jodorowsky, and they had made quite a bit of money off of The Holy Mountain, which is insane if you were to ever watch it. You'd think, how could something like this ever make money? But it did. And he's like, okay, Jodorowsky, you're a genius. You go and you make a movie for me. And Jodorowsky came up with this idea, and it just sort of hit him in the head. Dune. I'm going to make Dune, which at that point was about 10 years old, already a legendary book. And he's like, okay, that's about as insane of an idea as I possibly could make. Because what you don't realize is, in the 1970s, sci-fi was very hard to do. Today, you can make a sci-fi movie for nothing. In fact, people make them all the time, and they're completely meaningless. You know, like, you go and you make Star Trek Into Darkness with all these special effects, all these spaceships, all these planets, and it's like, it's completely you just don't feel the artistry anymore, because there's nothing, it doesn't take much work. But back then, back in the 70s, the only really big sci-fi movies were 2001, Planet of the Apes, and that might actually be it. And then there was Dark Star, which I'll come back to, but it was pretty much those 3. Those are like the only like mainstream successes, and Dark Star, not really. That's pretty insane in and of itself, but it wasn't until Star Wars in 1977 that suddenly people realized, you know, we can make special effects, for one thing, have evolved to the point that we can go and make all these planets, and all of this is possible. But the other thing is, we can make a lot of money off of it, which is why right after Star Wars happens, you get Alien, you get Blade Runner, you get all kinds of movies, you get Aliens, and that's what shot it forward. Now all of a sudden, space opera, space stuff. After Star Wars happened, everyone wanted to make a space movie. Unfortunately, Jodorowsky was coming around just a few years before George Lucas, and he has basically the same idea, just with a little twist. See, George Lucas, he was kind of making I hate to say the word safe, but yes, he was making a safe movie. He's going back to pretty much the bog standard of the heroic epic. You know, it's just, young boy goes and discovers powers, goes out, saves the universe. Pretty standard. You got all the little tropes and templates. It's like, at the time, that was kind of revolutionary because we were just sort of discovering that sort of thing. But on the other hand, you know, it's Hollywood. They understand easy heroes, easy villains, and it was recognizable because it was just Flash Gordon just a generation ago and those kind of stuff. People still remember that. And so Star Wars comes around, everything happens. Jodorowsky, however, is coming from a very different place. He goes and he sees Dune, and he's into drugs, he's into mind-bending stuff. He may or may not have magic powers if this documentary is to be believed. But he goes and he sees this idea of spice, this energy, this source that could go and open your mind to the universe, and he suddenly realizes this book has all these religious connotations, and he's kind of big into going and putting, like, weird Christian stuff into his movies. I don't know what the explanation for any of that Christian nonsense is. It may not make any sense to Jodorowsky either. But he's like, okay, let's go and make this movie. And so he goes and he assembles a team, and it's actually an amazing team he puts together. All around the world. Well, not exactly all around the world. America and Europe. But he has H.R. Geiger, who's Swiss, to go and design some of the world. He has Chris Foss, who is a British sci-fi artist. He goes and he makes, like, covers for sci-fi books, who's British. Michel Sardou is French, obviously. Who else we got? He wanted Salvador Dali, who's Spanish, to go and play a major role. Jean Giraudoux, also known as Mobius, who is a comic book artist. He wanted him. He's French. Pink Floyd, who's British. Who was his... one second. I'm sorry, I have this all written. Dan O'Bannon, as the special effects man, he was American. So, you know, he has this entire team. He's assembling this incredible collection of people. Orson Welles, he wanted to go and play a major role, who's also American. So, all these people coming from all around the world, assembling here, and he kind of, like, built a cult around himself. He'll show up and just, like, hunt these people down. He'll stalk them for a little bit, and he's like, do you want to make a movie? And I'll give them a little bit of weed. And he starts telling his insane plan. And he's an extremely charismatic man, as this documentary shows. And they all kind of jumped to him. They all were just drawn to him. They believed in this project. And it's actually kind of depressing. And you realize this never happened. So he has Mobius. He's going and he's drawing all the stills and whatever. He's planning out the scenes. He's got all that. He's got people going and drawing spaceships. There's all this artwork, all this planning that's gone in. Like, the movie was basically pretty much made. Like, it was pre-production was pretty much completely done. They had casted most everything. Jodorowsky actually wanted to go and get his son to go and play Paul, the main character, which is kind of crazy, but he was not going to be faithful to Frank Herbert. In fact, he describes it in the documentary that he raped Frank Herbert with his book. There's all kinds of crazy changes that were going on. It's wild, the movie he had planned. And revolutionary, because the special effects that Dan O'Bannon was doing, this planning they already had, this is basically exactly what George Lucas would do just 2-3 years later with Star Wars. Like, it was right there. They were just on the cusp. They just missed it. It's so depressing when you realize they just fucking missed it. Like, if they had just been a little less weird, and eventually, I'll tell you why it all fell apart. They needed like $15 million more, because they were all European art house. There wasn't much money there, so they had to go to where all the money was in filmmaking at the time, Hollywood, and they go and they show this script to Hollywood. They have all this planning. They have everything they have there, and they're like, wow, this is nuts, this is crazy. And Hollywood stole as many ideas as they possibly could from this after they got it. And they looked at it, like, yep, this is crazy, this is revolutionary, this is mind-bending. We don't do revolutionary, we don't do mind-bending. So, that was it. They were just simply told no, the money wasn't there, and it fell apart. Now, this documentary, which is called Jodorowsky's Dune, as I told you already, it's directed by Frank Pavich. Now, the structure of this documentary is pretty much just a long interview with Alejandro Jodorowsky, and they go and they look in the storyboards that Mobius drew. That's the word I was looking for earlier, storyboards. And they go and they flip through, and you see all this artwork, and they talk to the remaining people who are still alive. Unfortunately, quite a few people are dead. Dan O'Bannon's dead. H.R. Geiger's still alive. Mobius is dead. Chris Foss is still alive. There's a lot of talk of him. And of course, Alejandro Jodorowsky, who's 84 years old now, but he's still alive. And he doesn't look 84. You could possibly believe. He looks like he's in his 50s. And he's actually kind of shares not a passing resemblance with the most interesting man in the world. He's got the Spanish accent. He's gray. He's beautiful in his own way. He's just so magnetic. And, you actually really believe this. Actually, I don't think Dan O'Banion's dead. Let me double check that. No, Dan O'Banion's dead. Sorry. Yeah, that's a shame. I don't know what... They were actually able to talk with him, I think. Or they found some older interview where Dan O'Banion actually mentions that Jodorowsky, jumped into his apartment, just, broke in... Not broke in, but, he runs in, suddenly just hands him, unveils this newspaper full of weed. The guys, they both smoke it, and then Jodorowsky starts telling his grand plan for this incredible, beautiful, unbelievable Dune movie. And at some point, circles start spinning out of his head. All of a sudden, Jodorowsky's Dan O'Banion's not fully believing this. I may be getting it wrong who's telling this story. If I am, I'm sorry, but I'm just, whatever, this happens. All of a sudden, the guy's I'm still not buying this. I don't get what you're trying to do. So then Jodorowsky just says, this. And then all of a sudden, he just stares, and all of a sudden, circles and patterns and stuff start flowing out of the guy's head. You don't actually see that on film, because it was a hallucination, but, he had that power. And I'm willing to completely believe that he could go and fucking make hallucinations if you get high with him and he starts talking. He seems like that kind of guy. He seems like he's on a higher wavelength. And this is actually a really, really well-made documentary, I have to say. It's not entirely Frank Pavich's, because he found this material. I don't really like reviewing documentaries too much, because they kind of they're not really stories. They're not really artwork entirely of themselves. There is artistry to making them, but it's not something that's been completely created. It's he just happened to be lucky enough to find all this material, and it's amazing. And he starts animating some of the storyboards. The opening scene just sounds like the coolest thing ever. So, alright, you go and you open. You're at the top of the Dune galaxy. You zoom in. It's one continuous cut. You zoom in. You fly past planets. You fly past stars. Then all of a sudden you see spaceships are shooting at each other. And there's pirate ships, which were not in the original Dune at all. They're getting blasted. And billions of pounds of spice are pouring out into the stars, this amazing stardust effect, and you're seeing bodies floating by, and it's completely beautiful and unbelievable. The kind of stuff, it's described in this movie, the kind of stuff that he was trying to do. I think this may have been Nicholas Winding Refn, who goes and says this. I may not be pronouncing that right. He's the director of Drive and last year's Only God Forgives, which I won't get into, but he's a good director, and he actually was able to meet with Jodorowsky and read through. There's a book that he has. Jodorowsky has this one book that he made to go and show Hollywood producers. And it's all there. Everything he made, it's all within this one book, which I'd love to get published. I'd love to just see that in a Barnes & Nobles one day and just buy it and flip through it and just be, the whole story's there. It's basically just a comic book in its current form. And, he goes in, the way Nicholas Winding Refn describes it is he was trying things that George Lucas would not attempt until the originals, and even further, stuff he wouldn't even attempt in the prequels, the level of special effects. It's probably impossible, the stuff they were trying to do. The movie was so ambitious that it's unbelievable that they would have been able to accomplish everything that they planned to do. For example, Jodorowsky, at one point, for some reason, they decided they weren't going to discuss the basic problem of how long is the movie going to be until they're talking with Hollywood producers, who were well, let's have the movie be an hour and a half. That's a general time. This is the 1970s, so it wasn't you expected to sit for 2-3 hours for blockbusters like you do now. But, alright, we want an hour and a half. And Jodorowsky's no, not an hour and a half. I'm a warrior. I'm a spiritualist. This is God. He starts going off on his rant. It's 14 hours, 20 hours. I love Jodorowsky. I don't think I'm going to enjoy his movies. I think I generally have the same problem with them as I would with a Terrence Malick film. or any other kind of crazy art house film. But the man himself is just, like, that's what makes this documentary great. It's just like hanging out with Alejandro Jodorowsky for so long. You know, like, he's just this great Spanish gentleman, and I love the way that he occasionally kind of peppers his language with little bits of grammar that don't translate into English, they're only Spanish. He goes and he fluctuates between languages as he goes on. But, like, at one point he says his son had 12 years, which is Spanish. You say, mi hijo tiene... No, I have to be past tense. Whatever. You say had 12 years in Spanish. You don't say did. You don't say is 12 years old. You have years in Spanish. You don't. They are not you. Also, some emotions in Spanish you have. Like, you'll have hunger. You can be angry. You can be happy, but you have hunger. And I think you have... No, you can be sad, too. I think you have to have a hurry. If you are in a hurry in Spanish, you have to have it. If you understand what I'm saying. There's a verb tener that you use. It's not the verb to be, ser. Okay? So, I just love that about Alejandro Jodorowsky. That's the one little bit. My Spanish is terrible, by the way. I studied way too much of it in college for me to have any good excuse to be as bad at Spanish as I am. But, you know, it's just something I haven't been working on, so it just keeps flowing out of my brain as time goes by. If I started studying again, I could probably get decent. Whenever I try to speak Spanish, I get so terribly nervous that I can't possibly put together a sentence. It's kind of hopeless. Anyway, Jodorowsky's Dune. I loved the hell out of this movie. The movie itself, if he actually made it, might have sucked really bad. I mean, there were things in it that, no matter how art house and how insane it was, would be simply gorgeous. And one thing I loved, this is a complete invention, I'm just going to describe how crazy this movie is. Jodorowsky decided that Paul's dad, Guido, was a eunuch for some reason. He had lost his dick somehow. I don't know how. You know, I don't have the entire story ahead of me, but he doesn't have a penis. So, one of the major plots of this book, considering it's Dune, the Bene Gesserit sisterhood are big on eugenics, so you kind of have to have Leto Atreides giving his genetics with Jessica in order for that to work. What they did is they took a drop of blood. It goes inside of her, and it transforms into sperm, and it impregnates her. And this is entirely storyboarded, and you actually go up inside Jessica, and you travel in there. Well, yeah, that's a bit much. It sounds gorgeous, I'm gonna be honest. It really, really does sound really, really gorgeous, but yeah, I don't know. You know, talking back to the 1984 movie, I would not mind a little camera trip inside Francesca Annis. You know? Anyway, so that was Jodorowsky's Dune. You know what? I might actually list this as one of my favorite movies of 2014. And I'm going to call it a 2014 movie because it was only released here in 2014. I know it came out in the Cannes Film Festival last year, but fuck them, that's France. It's a 2014 movie. It may wind up on my list because this was really, really great filmmaking. It was just... The saddest part about it is that Jodorowsky's Dune, there's been so much that's been made. Even Jodorowsky himself, I was thinking this during the movie, and at the end, the last 5 minutes, he's like, you know, we could still make this movie, animation, if I just found an animated studio, just handed them over this storyboard, and, you know, you could have a movie made in a few years, you know, get some, Japanese team behind it. I'd love to see an anime made out of this, or something. It's all just sitting there. And just hearing about it is one of the best movies, one of the best movie watching experiences I've had. This isn't even a movie. It's a movie translated once. And I loved just hearing about it. It might be horrible. It's so ambitious. It's so crazy that obviously it's not going to be for everybody. And I'm giving myself a 50-50 if this movie was ever actually made to actually liking it. Because, you know, it's art house. It's going to be incomprehensible. There's going to be moments of so much symbolism. The director's just jerking off on screen, you know? Which, in Alejandro Jodorowsky's case, maybe I would want to watch it. I'm just really impressed by this man. Because he took it well. Losing his movie. This was his baby. This seems to be the one movie that he loved the most. And I guess that's one thing. You always love the book or the movie or whatever you couldn't make. Every director, every artist always has that one project that they couldn't get finished, and in their mind they will obviously expand it to be the greatest thing ever. Even I've had this experience. I remember I wrote down some idea for a short story once, and I lost the sheet of paper I wrote it on, and I'm like, where did it go? What was it? It had to be absolutely brilliant. Or you have a dream, which has such a great idea. You wake up, you think about it for 20 minutes, you're laying there, you're like, let me save this. Then you're getting up, your phone rings, you talk to somebody, you go to class, you go to work, whatever happens. By the end of the day, suddenly you get the slightest whisper of this great idea. It was right there, this brilliant, this world-shattering story, this, what was it? And then suddenly it's gone, and you realize, no, that was me, that was my ticket to the big time, that's what everyone wanted, it would have changed the world, and it's gone. And Jodorowsky's here, and he's telling that same story, and it's so tragic. But, you know what? Hey, I'm saying we should make this movie. But I'm still saying, as a documentary, it's fantastic, and if you get a chance to see it, go see it. It's available online through various unjustifiable acts of easy downloading, if you know what I'm saying. It starts with a T and rhymes with Orient. You can get it that way. Or you can just wait until it comes out on DVD. I think it might still be playing in Manhattan or something, but I love this movie, I love this documentary, and I really want to see this made. If I ever come up with like a couple $100 million, I'm going to throw it in there. I want this thing made. And I love the 1984 movie. I still do. I admit it's a piece of garbage. There's all kinds of problems with it, but I still think it's great. This, I think, would probably surpass it. Just as crazy. It might be another terrible movie, but you kind of learn to respect films. You get to a point where you realize, I don't enjoy this, or I do enjoy this, and I respect it, but I understand it's awful. You kind of have that difficult line. It's almost impossible to describe. Anyway, that was one documentary. I'm going to move over to a different documentary. This is Dear Mr. Watterson, which is another 2013 documentary. This one did not premiere in Cannes. This one premiered in Cannes. I'm not sure if it's Cannes or Cannes. French again. C-A-N-N-E-S. The E-S is silent. Why do you do this to me, France? Why? Germans should invade you people again. Anyway, this premiered in the Cleveland International Film Festival. I hope you realize I was joking before France. I wasn't really angry. Oh no, what have I done? All of France is going to be attacking me now. Anyway, this, again, Cleveland International Film Festival is when Dear Mr. Watterson premiered. I don't think it's had a film premiere yet. Oh, it had a limited release and video on demand in November 15th, but it just came out to Netflix like last week. This is made by Joel Allen Schroner, who is a very young filmmaker. I think he's in his late 20s, early 30s. However, he looks like he's my age. And I'm in my early 20s. I'm 23, but on a bad day, I look like I'm 15. So, Mr. Schroner, I feel weird saying it to somebody who looks that young to me, but respect. I always kind of put a level of respect between me and other people. If I'm going to address them directly, I'm going to put Mr. So, Mr. Schroner, I don't know you. I'm not just going to call you Joel. I'm polite, if nothing else. I understand your plight of looking very young. He was 6 years old when Calvin and Hobbes started, so that would mean he was born in 1979, which means he's... Oh, sorry. No, he's 35 then, if that's correct. Wow, he does not look 35, that's all I'm saying. If he's that old... Yeah, let me think. 80s, 10, 90s, 10, 2000s, 10, 4, 5... Yeah, he's 35 or 34. Sorry, it's a little bit of math there, but... Yeah, he does not look that old. And this movie doesn't really feel... I hate to be mean about this, but it doesn't really feel like a movie that was made by somebody that old. Actually, you know what? I gotta double check this. 1 minute. Yeah, he's 34 years old. I was exactly right. His birthday's in August 23rd. He doesn't look that old. He really doesn't. But, alright, so, this documentary isn't very good. Dear Mr. Watterson, it's about the greatest comic strip of all time, Calvin and Hobbes, of which of books I have all of them. I'm looking at them right now. I got all of them. Not the 10-year anniversary ones. I didn't get them because it was kind of redundant, but I got the Lazy Sunday book. I have the collected editions, the first 3, authoritative, something else, indispensable, whatever nonsense. I have those, and the individual publishing. I got them all. I got everything. It's over there. It's right there. Some aren't in very great shape. It's a Magical World is missing a few pages, tragically, but I got them all. They're there. If I wanted to, I could read them right now. And I do. I love Calvin and Hobbes. This is my childhood. So this documentary means a lot to me. But I have to admit, this documentary is rubbish. The first 20 minutes completely suck ass, because basically all they do is they go around and they talk to a few talking heads. It's a talking head style documentary. So you go and you talk to people on the street who don't seem all that terribly interested. There's one incredibly awkward interview with a father who's like, oh, I read Calvin and Hobbes and my son does too. And the little kid's like, he has that look of like, Dad, get me the fuck out of here. Dad, stop this now. Stop it. We're done. Enough, Dad. Enough. Like, if he could. You know, like, you could just see, like, seething rage. Like, his dads are so lame at times, aren't they? All dads are. This is one of those ultra lame dad moments, which unfortunately now everybody in the country gets to watch whenever they want to if they have Netflix. Everyone in the world, I guess. Immortalized for all time. This is probably as famous as either of these two people will ever get. And it has to be a lame dad moment. So awkward. So the first 20 minutes are just kind of like, this is why Calvin and Hobbes is great. And at no point does it really get beyond that. It's just like testimonials of why they love Calvin and Hobbes. And then the remaining body of the movie is just kind of the history of Calvin and Hobbes and what Dave Watterson did. No, David Watterson? Bill Watterson. Bill Watterson! Why did I call him Dave? Oh, God. Freelancing, the internet's most professional service. Nothing but the highest quality of scholarship from BlueHighwind. Obviously. So Bill Watterson, his work. Now, Bill Watterson actually is a fascinating human being because he's impossible to find. He does not exist as far as the last 20 years matter. Ever since he ended Calvin and Hobbes in 1995, he disappeared off the face of the earth. Like, I don't know where he lives. You can probably find his address. You can probably find his number if you want to be weird and stalkerish. And I'm sure people have been. This documentary is called Dear Mr. Watterson, which annoys me to no end because there's no comma after the dear. I feel like there should be. But anyway, it's Dear Mr. Watterson. And, you know, they don't really hunt for him. It's not really directed to him, weirdly. Like, I don't get the title. Because this isn't really a, you know, like, when I heard about it, and I heard about the name, and even the trailer seemed to be implying, like, this is your fan base, Mr. Watterson. We love you. We respect what you're doing. If you want to talk to us, you can. If you want to. But we understand that. Like, I feel like this should be addressed directly to him. But it's not. It's just kind of just a documentary on Calvin and Hobbes. It's really television quality. Like, if you understand it, like, it feels like an hour-long History Channel documentary about Calvin and Hobbes, you know, like, you know, you have the occasional celebrity guest and a few actual historians talking there and random people on the street. It's that quality, and it's not very good. And it doesn't help that I just watched it right after Jodorowsky's Dune, which is a fantastic documentary. Not the best I've ever seen, but really, really good. But this one, not very good. It has its own power, because it is Calvin and Hobbes, and once it starts actually talking about the history of this series, which is stuff I already knew. I mean, there wasn't any big surprises here. But there was some stuff I hadn't heard of. Like, there was a speech Bill Watterson gave that was apparently very controversial at a comic book convention of some sort, or like an industry get-together. We're all comic book artists, let's go hang out. He gives a very damning speech against the state of the newspaper industry and the state of merchandising and all that stuff. And I had never heard of that speech happening, but, you know, it's interesting that it happened. Now, if you haven't read Calvin and Hobbes, this documentary might be good for you to discover what this comic strip is. I really can't just tell you what Calvin and Hobbes is over a podcast. It's virtually indescribable. It's not indescribable. It's just the story of a 6-year-old kid whose name is Calvin, and his stuffed tiger friend, who is also his imaginary friend. He transforms into a cartoon tiger in the kid's perspective, and everyone else's perspective. It's a stuffed animal, and together they go on adventures. He's 6 years old, so there's kind of this level of anti-socialism. Nobody really fully understands him. He has his own imaginary world that we all had when we were kids, and he just wants to go out and play, but occasionally he's forced to go to school, or has to deal with his evil babysitter, or has to go take baths, and he's mad about that. So he goes out into space. He's a superhero. He's a private detective. And he's incredibly literate and extremely well-read as a kid for some reason. Like, he uses a lot of $5 words. This kid, by the way, Calvin and Hobbes, I think more than any other literary work or fictional work, pretty much defined my life. Because when I was reading these books as a kid, I'm like, oh, so this is how people are supposed to act. Probably not the best role model, Calvin, but I decided, you know what? Calvin is my philosopher. I'm going to live my life according to his teachings. And basically I have. You'll find a lot of people will describe themselves as, I was Calvin, but I think in my case it was more literal than most. You know, I had my own fantasy worlds. I didn't want to go to school. I really didn't want to go to school, and I made everyone know. Like, oh, if Calvin could go and just be a dick to everybody, I'm just going to be a dick to everybody. There you go. Because you don't realize as a kid that other people have feelings or stuff like that. You know, you just see people through your perspective. There's an egocentrism to children that you don't really develop out of it until well past high school in most people's cases, and in some people's cases, never. You never get past it. Anyway, I don't really have much to say about this documentary, because it just sort of follows the story again. And if you're familiar with Calvin Hobbes, you already know the story for the most part. Bill Watterson is easily the best comic book writer of, well, not comic book, comic strip. There's a distinction. He's the best newspaper comic strip artist of the last generation. I guess by now it's already passed. It's been 20 years. So he was the best at that time, and his influence continues to live on. Like, he is so good at drawing. Like, you don't realize this when you're reading this as a kid. You do realize, oh, this is pretty, and this is pretty, this is lovely. But, like, his ability to just, like, put down with this amazing kind of simplicity, just this autumn scene. He can go do it so well. He can go make a bush out of a few simple lines. There's a way that, like, the trees kind of wave out, the lines sort of break. You can see in Hobbes' tail, sometimes the lines overlap, and it's like little details like that, just the perfect balance of everything he's doing. He's so good, and he is so funny. These strips are hilarious. And he kind of, like, more than any other thing, I think, understood what it's like to be a kid, like more fictional books. I mean, I guess it's like there's a certain kind of kid that he's speaking to, the quiet kid, the weird kid, which is what I was, definitely. I'm still weird, I think. I hope I haven't gotten boring in my old age. I'm always worried that my, like, 7-year-old self will look at me and be like, who's this fucking asshole? Why would I become this shit? Nah, bullshit, I'm out of here. Nah, be gone with you, you loser. Anyway, so that's kind of the beauty of it. And the other weird thing about Bill Watterson is, number one, he is a incredible recluse. Like, he's just like, he doesn't talk to anybody, he doesn't give interviews, he has no web presence of any kind. Calvin and Hobbes was pre-internet, but pretty much at this point, everybody is online, everyone has a Facebook account. My grandma has a Facebook account. Not my 80-year-old grandma. Not my Polish Jewish grandma. She does not have an internet. She never will. That makes no sense to her. There's a certain segment of the population who will never get that far. She still watches 70s variety shows, which she was like 40 years old when those were airing too. Like, that's how old she is. So she's not getting on the internet. But Bill Watterson, he was born, what, the 60s, something like that? Born 1958. And he's been married actually for 30 years now. He doesn't have any kids, but he's like, he just doesn't talk to anybody. He didn't want anything to do with it. He's like, alright, he ended it in 1995. He just said, Calvin and Hobbes has accomplished everything I wanted to do. I guess he just got tired of it. He made the series for himself. It's his comic strip. He hit the top of the industry. He accomplished everything. He made 10 fantastic years of comic books. And then he's like, alright, I'm done. On top of his game, he retires. And then he just disappears. He does if you were to come back and make a comic strip, he'd be given so much money. And in fact, if you were to show up and suddenly be like, I want a Calvin and Hobbes movie, he'd have $100 million tomorrow. He'd be he'd be a billionaire probably within a couple of years, easily. But he rejects it. He rejects all of it. And Calvin and Hobbes, I talk about the books because that's all there is. There's books. If you've ever seen the decals on the back of people's cars of Calvin peeing on sports symbols or something like that, that's complete bootleg shit and completely disrespectful to the series. Calvin's not the kind of kid to get caught up in sports teams. I think he would immediately look at it and be like, this is a load of crap. We're being herded into tribes to being sold shit, is how he would look at it. This is an extreme... By the way, Calvin Hobbes is extremely subversive. It's pretty much a blatant attack on America in the 1980s and the 1990s. From an American man who I don't believe has ever left the country. He doesn't seem like the type of person to be a world traveler. Let's be honest. Maybe Bill Watterson is out there in Singapore partying it up in incognito, because not many people know what he looks like. He could easily do it. He might get occasional talk like, hey, you kind of look like the dad from Calvin and Hobbes, and that would, since he seems like a very shy individual, he would just run away. And at this point I realize I've completely wandered away from this documentary, but I don't really care. It's not that great. But, yeah, so what he does is like, alright, this is around the same age as Garfield. Garfield, as you know, was on, if you lived in the 90s, or especially in the 80s, Garfield was everywhere. You name a thing, Garfield was on it. He's everywhere. Big floats in the parades, all kinds of craziness. This is just before Pokemon, which is as merchandise. Pokemon is insane. There's not even a little kid here. One just comes around every so often, my little cousin. But he just leaves his Pokemon toys behind. So I have this huge collection on my desk. I just found a giant Chikorita this morning behind a toaster. So that's how crazy merchandise that was. And that's not even American, that's Japanese. But, Garfield everywhere. Calvin and Hobbes, nothing. Just comic books. You can only find them in bookstores, in libraries, school books, and kids still read it, apparently, according to this documentary. I was kind of worried that it would just sort of fade out, because I was on the tail end. I just happened to find a few books that my mom had. I read them, I loved them, I read the hell out of them, and my parents bought me all of them. By the way, tragic story is still the number one worst thing that ever happened to me in a book, and I consider books to be sacred objects on some level. So I'm really sorry this happened, but once my dad was driving me and my sister someplace, I don't know, I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I'm reading my Calvin and Hobbes books. It's Attack of the Mutant Killer Monster Snowgoons, something along those lines. There's a lot of adjectives in that title. I may be getting it a bit wrong, but who cares? So I'm reading it in the back of the car, and this is when I discovered I get nauseous when I'm reading in cars. And he's driving along some county road somewhere in New Jersey, I don't know where the hell we are. And I'm like, Dad, I feel sick. And he's like, no, I'm not pulling over. I don't know why I start joking like this for my dad. He doesn't talk anything like that. Like, no, we're not pulling over. We're not pulling over. Like, Dad, I'm gonna throw up. Can you please pull? No, just go out the window. Like, Dad, I'm 6 years old. I don't know how to put the window down. I don't want to do it. Just please pull over. And of course I don't. So I puke all over myself, all over the book, which Dad threw out. Because what were you going to do? There's puke all over the book. The book's ruined. It's over. And that broke my little heart. Like, it's my Calvin and Hobbes book. I only have 2 of them. I think that was the only. Actually, that might have been the only one I had. So I went like a few months without Calvin and Hobbes, and which to a kid is like an entire lifetime. And like that was sad. So anyway, back on this documentary, I think I said everything I needed to say about it. Um, I I almost feel like there should be an address to Bill Watterson. Like, we're not going to eat you if you just come out, just start a blog or something. Like just talk to us every so often. Maybe do an interview. Like, you're beloved. You are loved. There's nobody who dislikes you. There's nobody who doesn't like Calvin and Hobbes except for people whose heads are fully, completely well enclosed inside their own asses. So, you just show up, You don't have to go and merchandise the thing to insanity. I don't know. Maybe you can go make a few Hobbes plushies every so often. I'd love to have a Hobbes. I've always wanted a Hobbes doll. I never could have one because there was never one made. I think I might have asked my parents for one once, and no, they don't make them. Well, I'd like to have a Calvin and Hobbes shirt, but I'd have to go and have it made illegally. And that's a shame. It would be awesome. I know exactly the strip. I want Calvin and Hobbes. I want Calvin's dancing. Calvin and Hobbes are dancing. It's a Sunday strip. I want that on my T-shirt. And that would be the coolest shirt ever made. It'd be the coolest shirt ever made. No woman on earth would ever resist me. Yeah. Greatest shirt ever made would be. It's such a shame that it's not there. But if Bill Watterson is for any reason listening to this, which you aren't, I don't think if you know YouTube is there, you're definitely not going to find me. But no, you got a fan here. Alright? I consider you possibly my personal hero. I went through a while in my life where I wanted to be a cartoonist, but I never made it. I could never draw nearly satisfying enough for my own standards. And this is just me talking is basically what I do now. And it's okay, but it's not as artistic as I'd like to be. What's interesting about these two documentaries is I'm looking at something like a great artistic work that was never made and a great artistic work that was completely finished. It had so much, and both of them had so much impact in their own weird ways. There's all this stuff that's been made, all this greatness, and I've kind of never gotten there, have I? Like, I want to do something. This has gotten weirdly philosophical. I'm gonna go cut this off now, but yeah, I think something has to change. I gotta do something else. I'm not ending the blog, I'm not doing that, but I think we might be slowing down. Anyway, that's a discussion for another time, I guess. But they're kind of inspiring, these two documentaries in their own way, and I just might have been inspired that last minute. Huh. Anyway, let's move on. Blog stuff. I still have to review Gundam Unicorn. I don't know when that's ever going to happen. This Friday, Maleficent's coming out, and A Million Ways to Die in the West. I'll be doing that. I'm watching those movies, and I think I'll definitely review Maleficent, which has already gotten pretty mediocre reviews because I'm doing this on Thursday. Jesus. But A Million Ways to Die in the West, I haven't checked what those reviews are, but that's probably going to be a good movie. I don't know if I feel like reviewing it because it is a comedy. Depends how good it is. I don't like reviewing documentaries. I don't like reviewing comedies because there's kind of a solidness to story that I like to do. Because if this blog is anything, it is the study of stories. And a comedy isn't really a story. I mean, it is one, but it's kind of so tongue-in-cheek and full, like, it's there to entertain in a different way. And a documentary isn't really a story being made. It's taking older materials and making a story out of it, which sometimes is successful. Jodorowsky's Dune, fantastic. Sometimes not so successful. Dear Mr. Watterson. Which again, I just wanted to be clear, if anyone's mad about me not liking that movie, if you did like it, I mean, go ahead. I can see why if you haven't read Calvin and Hobbes, or you've just been introduced to it, or you're a Calvin and Hobbes fan, and your standards, I'm not saying you have low standards, but it's like, you just want to hear more about your strip, you want to see Seth Green talk about it, because he shows up. He knows comics, of course, Seth Green. So, yeah, if you enjoyed that, enjoy it. If you didn't enjoy Jodorowsky's Dune, I don't know what's wrong with you. That's a great movie. So, that's where we're going to end this time. Next week I'll try to get this out earlier. I still don't know what I'm even going to talk about, so there may not even be a Freelancin next week. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for listening. I have always been, and always shall be, BlueHighwind. And you were, once, and always will be, my beloved space monkeys. Been such a treat having you. Have a good week.